to bring something that feels mechanical and unforgiving into an intuitive painting process. Like, what's more liberating than that? Yep. All I want to do is march around in the forest. I think most of North America had the really cold snap last week. And yesterday it finally started to warm up. It was minus 40 here, which is the same in both Celsius and Fahrenheit. And now it's warmed up to minus 13 Celsius or so, which I think it's like, I don't know, maybe 0 Fahrenheit. I went out to change the batteries in my trail cam, and the snow is fresh and really beautiful. And we've been climbing uphill for a while. We're breaking trail, which is a job. Ari doesn't really help. She kind of goes all over the place. She's loving this. She's been cooped up indoors when it was so cold. And she's like the saddest dog you ever seen when she's in the house. Are we going onward? Usually we go a lot further, but it is definitely a lot more work today. Yep. All I want to do is march around in the forest and then read books and write about life, think about thoughts, maybe make some paintings. Just experience this every day. It's so pretty. Look in there. How would you paint that? It's too nice. Yep. First wind comes, it's all going to blow down in a shower, but it's so beautiful now. This is the lookout point. This is where we often end up on our walks. All they're going to hear is crunchy steps.
Snow.
Have we ever been up there when there was this much snow? Usually we don't attempt the deep snow. It's nice to come up when it's so fresh and beautiful. The town is over there. Now you know where I live. Sort of.
Can't really make out.
No, everything's just gray today. I like it. It's fun to stand here and try to map out the valley. Like, I was standing here the other day, and that horizontal dark band that's kind of there closer to us, that's the Poose River. And then Dawson Creek, which our town is named after, is straight ahead, and it's coming from the west. So it's but I don't know if it really does intersect. I think does it meet up with the Poose River at some point?
Right there.
Is it right there? See, we have to go kayaking again so we can sort that out. I suppose we could just hike down the riverbed in the winter.
Walk down there.
Yeah, that would be a thing to do. And then, yeah, we've got Bear Mountain is off that direction, which is not a mountain. It's just a long, low hill. And I have an artist friend who lives pretty much directly there on that hill. And of course, I can't actually see her house, but I often think about how we have this reverse view. When I'm seeing this, I watch the sunsets and she watches the sunrises over our respective hills. The other thing I think about, though, is how a vantage point like this, where we're up on a hill looking down, this is the way to really see the landscape. If you're at ground level, the landscape's totally different. And here I get to notice the different effects of the contours of the land. and all the low ups and downs. If I was standing on the ground, you know, I wouldn't be able to see all the way to town. Pretty much everything above that dark line would be invisible to me. So it's really neat to be able to just use this higher vantage point as for observation. And if you're painting landscapes, you should pay attention to where the viewer is presumed to be standing, the vantage point the artist painted the scene from, and what that tells you. Because if they're painting from down low, you know, they're going to have a different angle. And if they're up above their object, it's going to be different. And now with drone photography, we can do some pretty cool stuff with landscape. And it can make your paintings a lot more interesting when you think about changing up the vantage point from just a standard ground level, eye level kind of situation to something higher or lower. Here in the studio today, what I want to do is bring that experience to the painting. And I want to show you my process and talk a little bit about it as I take my walk yesterday and attempt to communicate just a little piece of that story onto my painting surface. So my primary goal is going to be not accurately, well, I guess the challenge here is that with my reference photo, I'm painting something that is so familiar. I've painted it so many dozens of times before, hundreds, I don't know, probably not hundreds, but I've painted it a lot. It's a scene that I know. How do I make this piece of paper more than just painting the same thing in the same way, all the ways I have done it before? And I really do believe that's my biggest challenge. I'm going to work on a half sheet of watercolor paper. I'm much more comfortable with larger sizes. I'll have to probably adjust my camera here, zoom, see if that works. My workspace is always too small because I run a camera, because I want everything to fit on the screen, because the computer needs to be close enough so that my cords aren't a problem. It just always ends up being kind of disaster. I also don't think I want this shape of paper, this proportion, because I'm kind of, I guess I could go vertical. But more than that, I kind of want to get in almost feeling like a square format. Definitely feels like when I'm walking down on a path, if I want to have that feeling, I need to think about the vertical format. And that, of course, is going to be hard to do with this size of paper on the camera. This is why my genius paintings always happen when the camera's turned off, because there's a lot of... it just gives you a lot more freedom. I don't have to try to fit what I'm doing on the screen. I work a little bigger. I don't know. It just, I don't have to be so conscious of what people are going to be seeing, I guess. It gives me more room to think about the painting. And I'm kind of propping, you can see there's the edge of my computer here actually, and that is where I'm going to kind of prop my paper and angle it a little bit. You're going to see most of what's going on. Okay, so the other thing I was thinking about in terms of this subject, it is a familiar subject. I've painted aspen trees, I've painted paths, I've never done it perfectly or to my full satisfaction, and that's the nature of making art. I love painting aspens. I'll pop up a few of the paintings I've done in the past that inspire me here. But I want this to be more intuitive. And I think to start with, I'm going to use I'm going to use this liquid charcoal. I have two. They're made by Schminke. This one is the Cherry Pit Black. This is Peach Stone Black. They're different. I think they're slightly different temperatures, basically. I think the cherry one is... trying to compare. It almost looks like the Peach Stone one is cooler, so we'll choose that one. And so that's a liquid charcoal. I just squirted out a tiny bit on my thumb. There it is. And that little mark right there is the reminder that I'm allowed to make a mess. That one is too. There we go. So we have now a flawed surface. Gives me the freedom maybe to do a little bit of my own thing. And I'm going to use a lot of water. I'm thinking about softness. Everything in that walk was really soft. You know, there weren't a lot of details that were crisp. There was a lot of contrast. And it was an overcast day. So, you know, my reference photos actually aren't ideal because on an overcast day, you don't get the strong shadows. And when the strong shadows are lacking, I'm just going to squeeze some of that into one of these little bowls and clean this out. With strong shadows lacking, maybe we can use some of that blue. I don't know why it looks foamy. Okay, so there's something. I wanted to talk a little bit about why this mess, why I'm not putting a lot of thought into these initial first strokes. And it's interesting because as a watercolorist, we know that as someone who works primarily in watercolor, I want to hesitate to be too quick to say I'm just a watercolorist because I use a lot more mixed media than I used to. But we know that what happens in those first layers, it doesn't disappear. It's lasting. We know that you can lose your whites early on. Just once I've let those colors set, it's really interesting to then release them and see how they flow. And so why would I just start with this kind of movement? Well, first of all, it's because I want to think about this as being an expression of my emotion rather than my what I saw. I have the ability to paint in extreme high levels of detail and paint, you know, the aspen trees much more accurately, but that doesn't really excite me. Generally, when I'm painting, what does make my heart pound a little faster is a freedom, that reminder that I can do whatever I want. This is my painting, and it's an expression of who I am. And I think this comes from this idea of painting as poetry. I don't have to, you know, what's more interesting, a story that makes you feel something or one that tells you and describes what you're seeing in, you know, clinical detail? I don't want to be clinical. And so here in this early stage, I can I'm thinking I'm being mindful of the fact that I do want to leave white space in my painting, that it's patterns of dark and light that are going to create impact. But I'm also aware that there's an element of self-expression that really is important. There's a little red mark there from a past painting, just because this is the back side of an old painting. And now I've got this black under my nails. And so I want to trust that there's something of my self-expression that's coming through here, a lot of my self-expression, and the things I don't know that are going to be communicated that I want to be sensitive to. So I'm just trying to create some energy on the paper that I can see and respond to. Right now I've got some things that are happening that I'm not crazy about, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I'm teaching myself here, what is this going to be today? And it's a learning process. Let's turn the paper. And that's really interesting because this actually feels landscape-esque, whereas in this direction, it almost feels like I'm thinking about two large tree trunks, and I don't really want to paint two large tree trunks. I've done that before. And I think a large part of painting for me is being on guard against that tendency to just want to do the same things over and over again. This is just a dried up marker with a kind of bendy tip. And I've been using it to pull paint around. There's still sometimes a little remnant of the original ink that kind of emerges if the brush tip has been wet for a while. But you can also pick up pigment with it. So there's a little bit of a brownish color coming off of there. This blue that was in here, and I don't know where it came from, I really kind of like what it brings to the painting. So we'll maybe see if there's some additional blues we can bring in here in a minute. I'm just going to dip into the charcoal. And see, that's crisper than I like, so I'm going to soften it. Okay. Let's just tilt a bit. And turn. This is a different direction than before. And you can see how buckled the paper is. That's not something that really troubles me. I can actually iron the painting after it's done if it turns out well. And truthfully, the big buckles can be an issue if you're working with puddles of water. They will pool in here. But that's actually just something that I can be present with in the painting. Because to me, this is so relational. And what I mean by that is, in a relationship, I don't get to control the other half of the relationship. I just get to receive what they have to give. And I think, and trust that whatever I have to give is going to be something that the other half of my relationship is going to receive. And that's important to me because I need to be reminded that there's room for me as I am. There is a tendency for me as a people-pleasing person to spend a lot of time trying to read the other person, think about what they want from me. And what I'm learning, and it's taken me so long, that's a beautiful shade of blue. We're just going to bring that into the painting. And I'm working with fresh pigment because I like the texture. It's so this idea of saying, I'm going to show up and just watch what the painting does and respond to it and use my instincts. And if I make a mess, I'm going to give myself permission to come in kind of awkwardly to enter the painting, with who and what I have to bring today. And when I do that, and I trust the painting to, be the other side of the relationship, to be a friend, it's kind of cool what surprises can come out of that painting process. And one of the ways we do that is by not expecting it to be productive. And so that's the other half of this. Oh, there's so many facets. There's so much that goes on in this painting process. It's this is a rather old brush, and it tends to have some fairly brittle hairs that pop off once in a while. But just this beautiful reminder that in a relationship, it's not always about being productive. So maybe this painting doesn't turn out today, and maybe that's also allowed. And I think that's, to me, the biggest lesson that watercolor has taught me is give it permission just to be what it is. And let that be, don't name it as, good or bad. This was a good painting day. This was a bad painting day. I'm not naming any of it. This was the day I painted, and that's the victory. See, I'm connecting this dark shape to this kind of dark shape that was here, and it is connected a bit to there. Let's bring it right up to the top of the page. Something like that. Let's pull it over this way too. This is why a big brush is really helpful. And the spray bottle can operate as a brush. It's kind of, because it is moving the pigment around, you could think of it almost as an additional paintbrush. There's a brush hair here that I'm going to just flick off. Interestingly, there's a hint of purple coming out here. There's a little fleck of almost looks like raw sienna, and I'm not sure if that was from the paint. As it flows, it separates. The one color I'm using is this Deep Sea Indigo from Schminke, and it's like Rockwell's self-evolving colors. It separates into multiple pigments as it dries, and you can see the individual kind of different character of the pigments that are in the paint. And with the self-evolving pigments, that's where you do want to use extra. You know, you want to either have a juicy amount from your palette or be working with fresh pigment, so that when you add in that water, when you give it room to flow, it there's pigments there to separate. There's different colors that are going to come out. Really liking that strong dark spot. It makes me want to put more strong dark spots in. Where would another one be? So interestingly, this is starting to feel like the landscape I looked at standing at the lookout point with Wade. And I'm seeing that, I think we're gonna try to develop it in that direction very gently and very graciously. So then this would be maybe a distant horizon. This would be perhaps the lookout that we're standing on looking, and there's tangles of underbrush. Let's see, where's my pencil? Oh, I've got this little tool. Maybe that will work. They're all parallel with each other because of the nature of this little rubber catalyst tool. And then, there's this guy. This is a very fine brush tip pen. It's actually got fibers like a paintbrush, but it's a black ink pen. And so something like that. And for all I know, I'm killing the pen to be writing on wet paper, but that's okay. We're going to just draw some of that charcoal down. I like that. So if I'm thinking of the painting as my opportunity to share my experience, I'm not just describing what something looked like in a clinical way, like I said, because that's boring. But I can describe it as an artist in a poetic way. That little drop of raw sienna down there inspired me, so we're going to bring that in. And make it wider because I want it proportionally to fit the page, and I'm not sure that it does. Spray bottle just to soften. So poetically, nothing has to be a tree. Nothing has to be a horizon line even. I mean, really, what is a horizon line? It's interesting. I feel like it's almost something that humans have invented, because you can never catch it. You know, it's always just a kind of a visual aid to tell you the distance between land and sky off in the distance. Because what's horizon far away from you? Oh my goodness, this is exciting. I have a tool I want to bring in here. So what's horizon far away from you is sky up above you. And then the horizon part would be what's at your feet. And that, that doesn't make sense visually if we were to try to draw that. So really, is there a separation between sky and land? This is a glass dip pen. I had it made by an artisan who is no longer making stuff on Etsy, but I can link up some other glass dip pens. There's a lot coming, very affordably coming out of like China and stuff. And maybe you know a glass artist who makes this kind of thing. I don't know. And the neat thing with this idea of responsiveness in a relationship is there's no accidents. There's no mistakes. And we don't wrap our heads around that very well. Learning to believe that there's nothing is a mistake. It's something we don't want to, we don't know how to talk about. we certainly don't talk about it with ourselves. But I guess I think about, if we're thinking relationally, I might think about my sister. And if my sister comes over to visit and we get together, we don't have an agenda usually. We generally will, make some tea and we'll have conversation and maybe we'll go for a walk because we both like to exercise, and is debatable. But we come together and we never think of our time together as being wasted because the goal was simply that we got to spend time together. And we don't live in the same town, and so it doesn't happen as often as we'd like, and all of that. So if I'm thinking relationally about my painting, then maybe there's no mistakes because the goal is just to come and do the painting. And we don't like that because we want to justify the cost of our materials. But I'm learning how to make space for this, to just paint things and not judge them. And I don't do very much planning anymore because my planning tends to result in things that are more rigid than I would like. So why have I been spending all this time over here? Well, I like the raw sienna. I want to bring that in. I actually think maybe there should be a counterpoint of raw sienna, maybe a big shape of it over here. And notice that I'm not saying names of things. Right now I'm thinking about instead the interplay and interaction between the shapes in my painting. And do I carry that across to this separate area where things are damper than they are over here? How do I connect it? Instead, I'm just thinking about, that passage. So, this could be a tree. It could symbolize a tree. This could symbolize the field down below, which I know if I'm painting this landscape, there's a field down there. And, this could be masses of trees. This could be sky coming down, or it could be some of the landscape there. There's a really gritty feel to this charcoal stuff that's kind of cool. And I'm hesitant to try to lighten this and say, okay, it's sky, so it shouldn't be so dark. Ooh, I kind of like those lines. Very thin, and they may not mean anything, but I like them. And I think so this idea for me, as I've changed so much over the years, and this idea that I don't have to name things anymore, that I can create in this kind of way. And this still feels like a big dark splotch, though, that I'm not loving. Let's try to lift some of it. I do have paper towel. And it will work to lift if I am gentle with it, no fussing. That was 3 little strokes with the paper towel. And then think about how to bring some texture over top of that once it's dried a little bit more. So by stopping naming things, I not only don't name my objects. This could symbolize a tree. It doesn't necessarily have to, but it could. This could symbolize, you know, the foreground. This could symbolize the background. This could symbolize sky. But I also have stopped naming mistakes and failures. You know, the relationship of showing up to paint is what matters. And so we go there. Let's bring in some more of that indigo. I'm just trying to remember if it was the deep sea indigo. I have a whole bunch of blues here that I wasn't sure if I would use. Oh yeah, we have the tundra blue and the deep sea indigo. You can see they're different. But I'm not very different, but maybe different enough that I don't want to bring them both into the painting. I'm not sure. So just stroke it right onto the paper. Why not? And a little bit of water. And it's so thick that you can see that it's not really moving much, but that'll soften it up so that we can do something with it. Nope, not with the dip pen. That's not working. Maybe with the... Nope, we need something bigger. Let's try this guy. Now that is a completely foreign shape. It's nowhere else in the painting, and that means I can either bring it in somewhere else, kind of interesting, or I can just kind of camouflage it and just blend it in a little bit. I felt like I needed something there to fill in that shape, but not too much maybe. And then I also wonder, just trying to bring more of that into the scene. There we go. If this white space would be, if it would be a good idea to fill that. We'll think about that a little bit. We're going to put some of the liquid charcoal on my brush. Put it in here. And I just went in to lighten that. Remember, I said I wanted texture, and apparently this is the way I'm going to bring in texture. And I just went over top of what could be a tree. And the reason I do that is because it doesn't have to be a tree. And by playing with foreground and background, I feel like I get to kind of play with my viewer a little bit too. I actually think it's to my viewer's advantage if I don't make a ton of statements with my painting. I get to be a little more open-ended. And put that mark of raw sienna where I went across with the charcoal. I've now put a little mark of raw sienna on the opposite side of what could be a tree trunk. Again, it's like a little game. And now maybe it's a tree trunk again. So it's interesting because right now I have kind of a square that's being formed by the intersection of these two lines and these two lines. And I do feel like that might be not a fantastic design decision. So if I'm thinking of a visual square, and I'm not interpreting any of this based on my reference photo, the reference photo, I trust it's in the back of my mind. But we're writing a poem and not a documentary. And even documentaries can be artistically done. I'm not knocking it. It's just I know what I want. And it's definitely more along the lines of poetry. The dip pen isn't the easiest for drawing with watercolor. Watercolor is so thin that I usually have to apply the watercolor with my brush, and then it may or may not flow off the brush. It might make a big drip, but I'm embracing that unpredictability. I kind of like that. Time to load it up again. So, okay, so the visual square that we have, what do we do with it? We can break it up somehow. Maybe should I bring a diagonal? I'm kind of toying with that idea. There's so many options. You don't get to know for sure which one's going to be the best. And I think, if we don't know how things are going to turn out, I would like that to be something that gives me peace. One thing I could do, and I'm really toying with the idea of adding a third shape. We've got 2 strong verticals, maybe a 4th strong vertical would do something here. And then it definitely feels now like trees, but adding in that strong vertical now, I feel like it adds, it still says trees, but it also is built on this wonderful abstract. Kind of liking that so much. Let's use the raw sienna. Because we've got a lot of cool violety blues here, and then the charcoal. I think it would be a fun little game to make raw sienna branches then. And I say branches, branch-like shapes. It's a little bit of a spider web of line. But it brings in some of that warm color, and I think it's going to be good. And then the real fun with this kind of relational painting is that here I am in my studio. I don't get to say whether what I'm doing is right or wrong. I don't get to know if there's a better way to paint this. I just come with a feeling and an idea and a mood. And we get to see where it goes. It doesn't work to... And when you're this free, over here there's a big, strong, dark blotch of raw sienna that fell on the paper when I wasn't looking. And it doesn't matter. It gets to live there. I don't have to be so present in every second of the painting that I can't let some of these things fall by the wayside. In fact, there's a flow of raw sienna that's happening into my charcoal that's really gorgeous too. Loving that. And little bold things allow bigger bold things to take place too. Just gonna tidy up that with a little splat charcoal. So now see this idea of having now 3 shapes. And this is kind of really interesting because it's almost 2.5. 2 strong dark shapes. This is a strong kind of shorter shape. And then the raw sienna, it's actually sinking into the painting a little bit more. So we don't have as much dominance there. I can try to bring it back if I want to, and bring in maybe some darks that indicate what's going on here. or I can let it be. And those get to be my decisions. Now maybe a little bit of spray. Push that edge. And then I can look at different parts of the painting and think about whether what's happening here needs to have a little echo somewhere else, and then choose if I want to bring some of those things somewhere else in the painting. Again, that unpredictable raw sienna. Really loving the really fine lines and even just the sensation of this glass pen. It has zero give or flex, and I use brush calligraphy pens every day for my journaling, and they're different because they have so much flex. And this little guy has no flex at all. It's just glass, and so it handles differently, and I like it. I like it because it feels unforgiving, and yet I'm choosing to use it in a way that's very to bring something that feels mechanical and unforgiving into an intuitive painting process. Like, what's more liberating than that? To bring straight lines into an organic line, it's though all of those beautiful things that say I get to do this. This is my painting. I get to do what I want. I get to paint what feels most interesting and freeing for me. And I get to trust the process. I can start with that. You can see here that starting with those messy scribbles in a vertical format was not, it didn't take me to where I eventually ended up, but it did give me a beginning and a foundation and a bit of a freedom. That's really, really helpful. Just releasing some of those dots of watercolor. Let's bring some of that black in over here. So what I've been noticing is that when I listen to other artists talk about their work, there are some things that's too much. That's a branch way too much. It's not a poem anymore. Break it. But I get red flags pop up when I hear people talk about making mistakes, and when they think that their painting's going to be redeemed by planning. Because what I've learned in relationships, control is not my friend. It doesn't make for a better relationship ever. Even raising children, and I was, your small children, you don't want them running out onto the street. And so you want to control their liberty. You want to give them safe boundaries. And that's always the thing, is the boundaries that keep them safe. And in your art practice, are you the unsafe quality in your paintings? Because if you are telling yourself that, you're not going to be happy until your painting is good, then you're not creating a safe environment for this kind of freedom and experimentation. To stop naming your paintings as good or bad, to stop naming the objects and just focus on creating something beautiful. I'm really liking those counterpoints of crisp, dark shapes. And then she goes in with the spray bottle again. Just a tiny bit of softness. And look at how that just brings your eye right here. And suddenly it's a landscape again, because our eye is going to a part of the landscape and then moving out. And I think I'm going to stop here. I really feel like there's very little I can do to improve upon this right now, to say more with it, especially because everything's wet. And even once it's dry, I tend to not want to touch a painting again. I don't want to lose the spirit of what has been done here. So I'm just going to do a little bit of spatter to try to bring in some more movement and texture in this area where I have a lot of lines. But the spatter can be a directional tool as well, just to move the viewer to create some energy, some finer shapes up here where there might have been smaller twigs that I'm not painting with literalism. And then, just because I have some paint on my brush, we'll bring some of that raw sienna, carry these dark marks with little stuttery marks of raw sienna. That one didn't work. Smudge it. But here I've made my painting practice in choosing not to articulate wrong, bad, even to say I don't like something, is to make a judgment that I'm not necessarily equipped to make during the painting process. And so having this freedom now to say, I'm going to show up and throw paint at and trust the spirit of where I've been is going to be communicated because it's fresh in my heart. And being invested in making this good relationship with my painting is what's going to make my painting better. And me not telling the painting that today we have to be productive. Today we have to do something good. Today it needs to look like, you fill in the blanks, name of thing. Letting go of all of that so the painting can become what it wants to be. And I get to watch and encourage some different things to happen and experiment. And not worry about getting it right or wrong. Just do it. And that has been super freeing to me. And I think right now what I'm seeing is we have a lot of things that are working. There's a potential maybe to do more with this, maybe bringing in more line over here. But I also know that my own knowledge of my tendencies to put in busy shapes when I should be focusing on larger shapes, to do things like that, make me want to pull back, give it a break, give it some time, and just let this painting exist as it is for a time period. And this isn't like, I'll come back tomorrow and add more paint and see what it needs. It might be months from now. It might, probably what I'll do is call it done. And then give it, a few days, a few weeks, and probably months before I would ever make the time to frame something like this. But I then get to get acquainted with what I've created and make decisions about where it fits in terms of whether I would show it or sell it, or if it's helping me develop something else in the future. There, that could be a tall weed coming up out of the bushes. I don't think anybody's going to look at this and think about fresh fallen snow, and that's okay. That's not necessarily the story. There's a whole story that nature is telling, and then there's my interpretation of it, and maybe this falls somewhere in between. And the thing about the story nature tells is that it tells it to every person that experiences it in a little different way. And so then we get to make it our own. So maybe some people get to do that with my paintings too. You get to see it and see your own story there. Your own experience gets to become a part of this narrative. And then it's interacting with you in a way I couldn't have orchestrated or predicted. See, now I'm getting, playing with fussy marks. So, and that's actually an example with this little brush pen of how something like this, as loose as it is, I can then come back in and I can actually build detail on this. And I probably should make that tree look really tree-like. I could come in and add bark, texture for the bark, define an edge of the trunk, maybe a bit over here too. Then those elements would start to pop forward. Right now they're really united with the background. And by doing that, I think that would also, it would probably make it more marketable, commercial, is that the right word? And bring something into it. And I'm kind of tempted to maybe think about doing that in the next painting session. I'm wondering if it's dry enough to put in those texture marks like I was talking about. I've stayed in the studio while I was waiting for it to dry, and I'm just going to see if I can go for it. And there's a number of ways I can do this. I could go back to my dip pen, my glass pen. I could bring in, this is a finer tip version of this one, and it's also quite dry. Or I could just use my paintbrush and be like a normal painter. But the paper is damp enough that actually using a brush means it's going to just bleed in. I might need to come back later. Although there's an advantage to sticking around, because when you wait, sometimes that in-between drying stage can be really good for bringing in some different effects. A little bit of soft flow. The drying stage can be really good for just softening edges or managing your blooms. And when the paper is almost dry, you can also bring in a little bit of texture that kind of blends into the background. You know, I'm talking about bringing in detail, but we're still being very loose. And not bringing in all the detail. I just want to suggest some detail. As a tendency, the tendency we have to label things is so challenging, because as I've been working on this and talking about bringing in detail to, you know, delineate the tree trunks, that means I have to put names on things. And there's a part of me that thinks, well, maybe as I'm evolving into more modern art, I shouldn't be going there anymore, into that level of detail and realism. But I get to do whatever I want. It's my painting practice, and whether or not this painting, and maybe it's just that we live or die by one painting. And so I feel like, you know, if I'm not consistently moving towards, you know, wherever I think I'm supposed to be going, maybe it's not a good use of my time to be working, you know, in a more representational way. But that's not really true either, because I never know where I'm going to end up. So having this idea that I can just consistently keep walking in a straight line and get where my art is meant to take me, well, that's not really an accurate projection of what the art journey looks like. I get to trust those back and forths in the process. It was a very overcast day, and I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, overcast days don't really make for the greatest photographs. They're easy to photograph, but because the light's very diffused. And so we end up with these very placid, peaceful paintings or photos. And when I'm painting a overcast photograph, I like to think about where the shadows and light are coming from. And it's hard to see that because the diffused light means there really isn't very strong shadows and everything's very soft. And so if I want a more evocative mood than that, then maybe I want to take more freedom with my decisions, exaggerate some of the lights and darks. And maybe I don't have to think about that. I can just chase those lights and darks and see where it ends up going. I already have a lot of darks in this painting, and I can think about how they're playing off of each other and where they guide the eye. There's a lot of darks actually all the way up the tree trunk. So I don't know about that dark spot. It kind of argues with the one beside it. I'm just gonna lift it out and give it a little bit of a softer effect. Add a dab of raw sienna there as well. And maybe I want to bring in some of the same kind of lavender that I used up here, just a lighter value to blend that in. And sometimes what happens in this too is we have the feeling like we're undoing earlier decisions. But I think with watercolor, one thing that I love is the fact that you never really get to undo a decision that you've made. It's always kind of a part of the record or the history of the painting. Even when it's been covered, it's still there. And I think of that too because sometimes you'll have these tiny, tiny invisible lines that created, almost invisible, so faint that at the end of the day, I might be the only one they matter to. And I think that's kind of wonderful because then the painting becomes a gift to myself. And I think it's interesting because ever since I was a little girl, I have had stories that I told myself. I've been a little bit of a dreamer, and I never used to tell people that until just recently. And you know, some of those stories I would tell myself are stories I've made up, but some of them are memories that I have of things that have mattered to me and happened in my life. And I don't talk about them with other people, although I've started to lately. But for many years, I had these memories and stories I would tell myself, things that happened in my life that I cared about. And I think in painting, that idea of savoring moments and memories and things that matter to you personally, telling yourself these stories and getting to put them into your painting, it's a relational thing. It's a relationship not just with the painting, but with the me who's making the painting and making choices about what to put in. I'm going to add in a little bit of raw sienna with my pen as well. I like the idea of having a few branches in that beautiful warm kind of buttery color. And you know, maybe these fine lines really are just for me. Maybe I'm doing too many. And maybe I'm just trying to prolong the joy of the painting, and that's all okay. When I'm here getting these walks, getting outdoors, and sometimes I listen to a podcast or something that, you know, keeps me, gets me thinking about ideas, but mostly I want to come out here and just have no audio, no soundtrack, except maybe the sound of vehicles and the occasional airplane. We do live near the airport. It's not a very busy airport, so it's actually fairly rare that we have planes crossing over, or maybe we've just tuned it out. And but you know, I need to walk. It unspools my brain, and it does spark ideas, and it gets me. I always find myself vocalizing. I think that's a weird way to say it, but I always find myself kind of talking to myself as usually towards the end of the walk or the halfway point. I start actually talking about what I'm thinking about, and it's interesting what comes out. And the great thing about hiking alone, just me and Ari, is I don't have to be conscious of what other people, you know, are thinking or saying. So I just end up kind of talking to myself and saying all the things that maybe I feel anxious to say in front of other people. So it's just a me and God kind of moment. And that's, I think it's really good for me. And then there's always, so there's a sense of peace that comes out of that. And then the creative ideas start to happen as well. And so that's pretty cool. And I think well worth it. And so often I just try to train myself to just be present and notice the beautiful surroundings I'm in. See what there is to see. And even though I walk here really often, trying not to fall. That's her hurry up, come and play sound. Even though I walk here pretty often, and you'd think it's really familiar, you start to become attuned to nuance. Things, you know, different times of day, different kinds of lighting. The bird song. Just looking for tracks in the snow from the critters. And, you know, all of that idea of being attuned to nuance with the familiar is something that I think about in my art. Painting the same subject over and over again, using a medium that I know really well. And yet there's so much more that is possible with it. And so there's something about that, and I think it's only right that my art parallels nature like that, and my experience of nature in the familiar. And so, yeah, it's part of my artist statement. And this is the finished painting. As you can see, I did go in after the video and just messed around a little bit, adding in a little bit of a pop of red, quinacridone sienna, just to create some leaves and break up and add, I guess, a little bit of warm color on top of the raw sienna. And I'm liking the effect that created. Every painting is an exploration and an adventure, and I'm really glad I got to share this one with you. Join the Heart-Led Artist Journey for monthly lessons that will help you develop your own heart-prioritizing artistic style.